Alrighty, we are back live again. Sorry for that delay. We've had some fun with our sound system, trying to get everything worked out between too much noise, not enough noise, too much backup sounds, etc. We are apparently ready to go right now. So this is Jonathan Albin, and we're talking tonight about roleplay basics. And I know that if you are a role player, this is going to be old hat to you, but I am telling you right now that if you have players that are in your game sessions that have not had the opportunity to go through roleplay basics, this will be a great training course or primer course for them. And if you are already a veteran, this will just be a refresher. Role-playing by mechanism is, for lack of a more elegant description, exactly what we did when we were kids. You're playing within the framework of an imaginary or fictional framework, and you are considering and making decisions based on that alternate reality, that fake place that you go to when you are engaging or playing with other folks. And when we're talking about it in terms of our youth and in the days before established role-play games when we were younger, the framework is a slightly more regimented than at that point. That is to say that there are rules about who hit who shot who saw who, whose action time is it, whose opportunity is it to make decisions, and so on. And mechanically, it's really not much different than it was then, other than there are regimented determinations as far as success or failure on particular choices and chances. So, with that in mind, when we talk about roleplay basics, the first thing we have to talk about is the identity, who you are in the story. And this can vary wildly depending on which game system you're using and which genre you're playing through and which rules set you're going to be utilizing. But in terms of roleplay basics, we're only talking about the most common denominators of these things. And so the relevant piece of this is that everyone takes on a persona. You become a personal identity within the framework of the story being told. So if let's say the genre is, for lack of to take the simplest terms, if it is the Dungeons and Dragons background, then the setting is a high fantasy world where magic works and here there be dragons. And with that understanding, the persona, the character that you play, has to fit into that regime. And because of the fact that it's living within that framework of that regime, the limitations in terms of who you get to play, what persona you get to take on, what attributes, what skills, what talents, what mechanisms you get to deploy are determined by the rule set. So in the case of the Dungeons and Dragons framework, you get to choose from a limited array of classes and species. They no longer call it races, species. And then you choose and determine your attribute scores, adjust them by the species, and then determine the class that you're playing with, and then ultimately the advancement level that you get to accept at the beginning of the game. And all of those things are arbitrarily chosen by your storyteller or game master. In some cases, the attribution can be purely by the dice rolls. In other systems, the game master will direct what species you have the option to play, or they'll leave it to a die roll. And whichever way they decide to define it, your role, therefore, in the role playing game is to take on the decision making apparatus for this being in this framework and do your best to play through that role during the period of the game time frame, and then utilize die rolls to approximate the random number generation effect scale of what you did or didn't accomplish within that game. All that to say, you get to make up the story of what your persona is doing within the framework of what the game master directs, and then you decide what you want to attempt, and then the game master determines your success, failure within that framework. Now, in role-playing games as a basis, those limitations are only set by the storyteller, the game master, who then, because of that defining mechanism, provides the player with the list of options, or the opportunity to give suggestions as far as options, and then from that list of options or that choice of decisions, determine the relatively valuable success or failure of that. Well, that's interesting. That's not what I wanted. Once these choices are made, then the game master simply directs the story, adds in the variables, gives the situation updates. The players then make the decisions. The GM resolves or determines the resolution of those choices. The players play through it, roll the dice, move on to the next part, and wash, rinse, repeat over and over again. I'm messing with my audio settings if you can't tell. Well, isn't that special? It's showing a microphone already online, and I'm hearing the audio already, so I don't need that. That's not providing it. Well, that's challenging. Desktop audio. There we go. That's where I was messing up. There we go. Okay. Phew. Fix that. That's good. Alrighty. So, what does the basics of role play really mean? Well, let's look at the persona for a second. The character that you play within the story is generally a matrix of attributes and the die rolls that you make to determine their value. That matrix is then compared against a set of normatives that are defined by the game mechanic, and your position in that game mechanic, relatively speaking, tells you whether you're stronger than someone else, or weaker, faster, or less speedy, or clever, or less so. And as you have this now matrix of the numbers, you use those numbers to determine outcomes. You have to, of course, then have beyond your attributes, these base numbers, you have to have other associated numbers, and those equate to a a pile of wound points that have to be overcome for your persona to be eliminated, or a set of numbers that represent the relative toughness and resilience of your armor, or both. And then, in addition to that, you will have a set of points that determine your set ability scores based on your class and your species and your race. With all of those numbers, therefore, you are just simply looking to answer the Game Master's questions in terms of the story, and then achieve numeric values that he sets for you for the accomplishment of those tasks in game. And as you succeed at them or fail at them, then the story elements change in process through to completion. And that's basically it. You're playing a fictional story and you're answering as if you were that person in that condition doing those things. And sounds really simple, and yet a lot of people find it difficult to take on the roles of other individuals in play. And actually that has, I believe, a considerable amount to do with a person's internal fears about public speaking. They say that public speaking is the greatest fear, even above darkness and snakes and being naked. The idea of standing in front of an audience and talking is a much greater fear for most people. And so the elements of those overcoming those fears is what makes role-play games so appealing to some people. It is perhaps the only place in their lives where they have the ability to do so in an unjudgmental place. The participants in the game are looking forward to your input, and so therefore they are encouraging you and supportive of you as you make those decisions in game and decide and describe what you're doing in that process. There are so many things you can add onto that, but that is really the core essence of why role-playing is such a powerful tool, is it's letting us take the very fear that we have and put it aside in favor of being stronger than that fear and speaking out, even if it's only in a fictional setting. This ability, therefore, to speak in a fictional setting and to describe what we actually feel or experience, or at least in terms of the persona feel or experience, is a charge. It's a thrill to get to put your ideas into work and watch them have fruition. We can, of course, add to that in the case of, as we've talked about in the last couple of days, the YOLOs and Leroy Jenkins of the world that are looking for, and yes, I know I'm saying that weird and I'm doing it on purpose, but the idea of the player who knows that you only live once and wants to see what the experience will be in the fictional world that they're running in. Or conversely, if they are the Leroy Jenkins variety, they want to push the envelope and see what they can accomplish. These are secondary, I believe, to the overcoming of the fear of public speaking in terms of charged output. The reason why it works so well in play is that it is an unjudgmented place. We can actually do the action, speak the words, watch for the outcome without recrimination, without judgment, without somebody snarky picking on us or whatever. As a matter of fact, in tonight's game, for example, there was a situation where the player has felt in past times that they were being, focused on, put on the spot, and yet this time they stood up of their own volition and were able to speak in a fourth wall situation where their persona crossed the line between a persona in a game and the players that were making up the rest of his group. And so it was a fun sight to watch that player who had been a quailing, fearful, uncertain local personality suddenly able to step forward and take the microphone, so to speak, and speak to an audience. It was amazing. And I think that will really help that individual and any other individual that gets into that situation to really advance in the world, because they will be able to take on the challenges that they face in other environments, knowing they have the confidence to do it in such a simple, peaceful place. Now, when we talk about basic role play, it doesn't matter which mechanism you're playing in under. They all have basic tenets, one of which is character agency. So the persona that you take on, the role that you play, does itself have an impact on what in the world is going on and what others might experience from you. And because of that ability to engage, the elements of the conflict don't depend on the mechanism of the die rolling. And that's why I said, if you are playing a role play game, the game master will tell you which dice to roll. The game master will assess the random possibility of success or failure, and you simply just roll the dice and then roll with the outcome. It's not a matter of having to be a specialist in a mechanism. And I think this is why role playing has gotten such a negative image in the world, because so many people assume that to be a role player you have to have a large box of asset knowledge in order to participate, when in all candor it really doesn't take that much, because the personas, the characters involved in the story, are still subject to the whims and direction of the game master. With that in mind, therefore, a player's basic experience in role-playing games has more to do with what they want out of the game. And so my recommendation is, if you are in a role-play basic situation and you've never been at a role-playing table before, consider that it's actually you. They consider and internalize the decisions that you're being asked to make in game through the filter of who you are as a person. Now, some would argue that this is stepping away from role play, because the essence of role play is to play someone other than yourself. But if you've never acted in a dramatic role before, it's a little harder to do. So instead of stepping out of yourself to take on your first role, why don't you step into yourself and think about the ramifications of what you're doing from the frame of reference of what it would be like if that was a situation for you personally. Now, this sounds like I'm saying the opposite of what I generally recommend, which is that a person actually role play, which is play a role, rather than try to make themselves the persona. But what I'm really talking about is the actual process of making the decisions. It's easy to say, well, I'm playing, a nobleman from a faraway country, and I speak with a funny accent, and it's fine to say all those things. But when the rubber meets the road and you are actually playing that persona, stepping into that role, then suddenly you're talking about a completely different thing. You are now having to make decisions with a mind that isn't yours. So instead, especially early on in your roleplay experience, I would say roleplay basics, just be yourself. But be yourself with pointy ears, or be yourself with a wider nose, or be yourself with a limp, or whatever you want to add as the distinctive feature, so that you can still acknowledge that it's a role other than yourself. And it goes back to what we did when we were kids. When you said, I'm going to go outside and play, fireman with your buddy down the street. You're going to run around on your bicycle making the siren sounds and racing to the next scene of an imaginary fire. That's role play. When you actually determine whether or not the fire is burning something or whether an individual can be rescued, then you ascribe a numeric value to that. Now that's role play because you're actually determining the dice mechanisms to give you the success fail rate for the action in a way that makes sense for the game. So, trying to get my chair shot almost out of the way. Finally, the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of role play is the demise. If something happens in the game in the situation and goes very wrong, just realize that it's only a game. It's just like outside playing cops and robbers. If somebody goes pow pow, you're dead, and the game master says, "Yep, you're dead." Pick a new persona. Pick a different attribute you want to give yourself. Think a little bit differently and jump right in and play another persona because it's just a piece of paper. It's just a fictional existence anyway. And yes, it'll take some getting used to jumping in and jumping out of character. Sometimes you'll fall in love with one and want to be more involved in that persona. Still others will be cast-offs that you don't really care about. But the idea here is that the element of role play that you are taking on can end in game, and that's okay because the persona simply moves on to another realm, another reality. So don't feel like you're bound to that persona in any kind of way, and instead just have fun. The longer you play, the more disparate your characters will be from yourself, the more distant they will be in terms of their feeling and their emotion and their attitudes, and therefore you'll be able to step more into a actual role of a persona. And that really is when I say don't fall back into being yourself, is once you understand that the persona is someone else, take advantage of that, enjoy the fun of it, and be that other being and enjoy those experiences. Role-playing basics also is a matter of understanding that the story that's being told by the game master itself is just that, a story, and similarities to reality can be stark. Sometimes they can be, I played several games of, for example, Call of Cthulhu, where the story elements are ripped straight from the headlines and made into game mechanics, and therefore created a much more visceral play experience. And yet we all knew that that was still fictional and it was still just a game. And even knowing that it's fake, even knowing that it's a game, can give you a very positive play experience if you let yourself embrace that and become part of the story. And decide which parts of that story apply to you, and then you pick up the ball and make the story expand more deeply for yourself and become more real. I guess the final point that I would have to say about role-playing basics is that if you don't find yourself enjoying the play mechanism you're currently playing, try another one. Role-playing systems are kind of like shoes. The ones that you particularly enjoy and like and fit the best will be the ones that you'll want to use over and over again. Don't feel that you have to be married to a system. If the play mechanism doesn't work for you, try another one. I know that the very purpose that I came up with for writing the NycosRPG was to find a mechanism that can be a one-size-fits-all, that actually draws in the elements that are fun in all the other mechanisms and yet simplifies it and boils it down to the usable least common denominators for new players to pick up and run with from the very get-go. And so I prefer to think of Nykos as sort of a toolbox of mechanisms rather than a standalone role-play mechanism, unless, of course, you've been able to filter past all the other mechanisms to come back around to Nykos. Originally, it's designed to be a saddle mechanism that you could play over the top of others and yet eventually it overwrite all of the internal mechanisms you might have played before. I think you'd be able to see that when we play. But speaking of which, I want to thank you for having watched the video for this half an hour. We are coming up on the break, and I don't want to push you through commercials if I can help it. I know that that's part of the mechanism of the channel, so I apologize if that does happen. But realize that you can become a part of the world of Nykos via NycosRPG.com, and you can actually purchase the property there, or you can learn more by utilizing the fast play that's available there on the Play RPG page. You can also find out about our lore by checking out NycosRPG.info, which is my data lore site at World Anvil. And finally, if you want to become a part of our community and join our play sessions on Saturdays and Sundays, you can join our Patreon account at patreon.com/Nykos, N-Y-C-O-S. And as a member there, you get access to our Saturday and Sunday online role-play system utilizing Discord as the vehicle for our sessions. That's Saturdays at 9 in the morning and Sundays at 1 p.m. Pacific, and both of those times are in Pacific time zone. Also, if you're in the Southern California, make sure you Southern California area, please come by the store at Board Game Paradise in Redlands, California on Monday nights and Tuesday nights. We have a lot of fun in a contiguous campaign there, and all of the game sessions I'm speaking of are in the same game world at the same game time, and we have had crossover sections from time to time. So feel free to be a part of those as well. Before I depart, I also wanted to thank you for being here. Make sure that you follow us here on Facebook. Like us on Facebook. Follow us at twitch.tv/Nykos, and like and subscribe at NycosRPG.com on YouTube. And there you can see something like 700 videos. So there's a lot there to chew on and lots more to learn about role-playing. Till then, this is Jonathan Albin. I want to thank you for being here this half hour, and we will see you in the next show. Remember, we're on every day at 10 a.m. Pacific time and 11 p.m. Pacific time. And tomorrow is News Day, and so News Day, the nightly Gnome News will be tomorrow night, and that's when we catch you up on all the episodes that we are playing, and therefore there will be some Easter eggs, I wouldn't call them spoilers because all of my groups are aware of somewhat of the other stories, and so there's no real surprises, and yet many players will find useful Easter eggs in those episodes. And if you haven't seen the last couple episodes at NycosRPG.com, last couple episodes, they are available at YouTube, on YouTube at NycosRPG. And thank you for watching here, and please subscribe over there. It really helps us to keep it a daily channel. Until next time, have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.